was about the neglect and the lack of follow-through by the VA on what they did to myself and my mom. In October 10th of 2010, I called the VA in Honolulu, and I called the Hawaii senators in Honolulu about the abuse that I felt my son was going through through someone else. Nobody followed through. On June 6th in 2011, I called to meet with the Big Island of Hawaii, because I was there visiting, and it was the lack of follow-through, and it was not a good visit, because I was trying really hard to find out what was going on with my son. His words were slurred, his speech was slurred. When I went to visit him, he didn't make sense. Nothing seemed to connect good enough. I went home, back to St. Louis. I called on September 2nd, 2011. I called April 27th, 2012. I called April 30th, 2012. I called May 2nd, 2012. I called May 31st, 2012 about the abuse that I felt my son was going through. I filed the reports, and then I asked for a copy of said report from the Hilo office. They refused to give it to me. These all were done in accordance to what I felt was abuse. Nothing was done. I called the Hilo office, I called the Kona office. Nothing was done. So then I called Honolulu and to Senator Inouye's office, and I talked to a gentleman there, and I told him what I felt was going on. And he said, well, you know, unless you have any proof. And I said, you know, I'd rather be wrong and have everybody mad at me than be right and lose my son. I have to do this. I felt down deep, I had to do this. So I did, and I started doing welfare checks by calling the police department in Honoka'a. I called the police department in Waimea. I called the police department in Hilo, Hawaii. Nothing was done. They did their welfare checks. They would call back. There was nothing, there was no follow-through. They said there was nothing that they could do. These checks were done on September 2nd when I called the office, and then I called immediately the Honoka'a office. On September 3rd, I called the Honoka'a police, and I called the watch commander. I also, on September 4th, I called for a welfare check again. On April 22nd, 2012, I called for another welfare check. On May 10th, 2012, I called the police department in Waimea and Honoka'a and asked for a welfare check. On 5/19/2012, a welfare check was done by my mother, his grandmother, for Dennis. The police officer then at that time told my mother, well, he's not here anymore, but he's in a better place, and I can't tell you where he's at. So we started calling. I started calling all my friends. I was in St. Louis, calling friends, people, anybody that would help. We got to find Dennis. I didn't know where my son was. I was scared for his safety. My friends Shannon and June Hart went looking for Dennis in Hilo. They found him in the Yokuro Otsuku Veterans Home, which is run by the Avalon Company out of California. They found Dennis, they took a picture of Dennis, and they sent it to me. Didn't recognize my son. So immediately I became alert about what was going on. So on September 18th, I had called to do another welfare check because I still didn't know where he was. Out of all these welfare checks, one police officer calls me back who said he was an Iraqi war vet, and said, if your son wants to kill himself, there's nothing you can do about it. I tried to explain to him it wasn't my son I was concerned about killing himself, it was other people helping him to do that. The VA employees involved in this were absolutely unhelpful. They did anything and everything to control Dennis and to keep him under their control. I went to the VA doctor in Kona, and I asked her some questions about Dennis's care. Of course, Dennis was married at the time, and she had the power of attorney, so I really didn't have much rights. But I did ask her about his care, what she was doing, what was going on for his MS and for his brain injury. And I told her I wanted to get a hold of the Mayo Clinic and find out about getting my son special care. She told me that couldn't be done. So I asked her credentials. Are you an MS specialist? No, she was a physician's assistant. That was the title she gave me. I couldn't believe this is how the VA was treating my son. So when I found out my son was put into this home where people there were 80, 90 years old, dying, and Dennis was 38 years old. And when I found out he was there, I was beside myself on what to do. I didn't have the money to fly home, so I needed to talk to the VA throughout this. The people involved in this VA situation, the employees, were awful. They weren't thinking about Dennis and about what he was going through. It was like a mind game to see who they could control. It was all about control. And on May 30th, I called Roxanne Rowe, who is Dennis's VA caseworker in Hilo, Hawaii. She didn't call me back. I called on May 2nd. They said she was gone. I called on May 12th. They said she was gone. I asked to talk to her supervisor, Barbara Fujimoto. No answer. I called on November 7th, 2012. Called the caseworker, Jill Vasconcelos, who was not only rude, but threatened me if I ever called her back. I tried to explain to her that the power of attorney was being taken away from his now ex-wife, and my mother was going to be the power of attorney through a lawyer. She said, I can't tell you where he is. If I told you where he is, then you'd go there. I didn't understand the whole concept because all I wanted to know was who would go visit a wounded warrior if they have a caseworker. Is there someone I can talk to? She told me it was none of my business and that she wouldn't give me any information. So I explained to her I was going to call the VA and turn her in, which I did. On November 7th, 2012, I called the caseworker then to let them know that my mother was now the POA, no longer the ex-wife. My mother had control, and we were making changes in my son's life. We were going to give him the help that he deserved. And on November 8th, I called Barbara Fujimoto again to file a complaint against Jill and Roxanne. Nobody answered the phone. I left a message. I also said that the lack of care that you're dealing to my son is just basically you want to warehouse him. You want to put him away because you don't know what to do. You know, maybe you're overwhelmed in the system. I have one wounded warrior son, and I was out of my mind with how he could die and nobody seemed to care. It's just a statistic. He was just a statistic to these people. So then I called the VA clinic to complain to the patient advocate about Jill, Barbara, and Roxanne. On November 26, 2012, I called Barbara Fujimoto again. No answer. 11/27/2012, I called the VA center, Hilo Center, and I talked to someone to file a complaint and to tell them about what was going on with my son. They cut me off and said, you know, you got to call this number instead. So I called another number. And then again, I called the patient advocacy to file a complaint. Then I wrote the letters to the VA in Hilo, VA Honolulu, VA Department of Veterans Affairs Eric Senseki, Senator Inouye, Director of Department of Veterans Affairs Senator Akaka. All these letters I sent, and I had them issued as return receipts, so someone had to sign for them. On January 19th, towards the end of all this, I called Roxanne Rowe, And she got very angry that I had called her number, that I shouldn't have known this number, which I didn't know. I said, well, can I call you at your office? And she said no. Well, I did anyway. And still, nothing happened. On January 11th, 13th, last minute, my mother and I are in the home with Dennis. And the VA doctor comes in and says there's a VA appointment for Dennis. Last minute. Nothing was on the books for an appointment that Dennis had to go to. So we looked at it. My mother was very suspicious that all of a sudden he had this appointment. Well, we were going to go with him. My mother and I both went with him. We found out it was a competency hearing. His ex-wife, now ex-wife, and the VA were doing a competency hearing. And you can't tell me that people weren't working with the ex-wife to have Dennis declared incompetent so they could control his money. And that's exactly what it was. We went, he passed. So I called to file a report again, and I called the VA office in Hilo, I called in Honolulu to file a report, to file a complaint. I have dates and times. This is just a guideline of some of them. I have dates and times of all of these people that did this, not just to my son, but tried to control it through myself. Dennis was dumped in the Yokuro Otsuko home on May 18th, 2012 by his then wife and his father. They put him in a truck, took him to the home, and dumped him off. And he was told this was where he was going to spend the rest of his life. When I borrowed money to fly to Hawaii on December 17th, and then I borrowed money to stay in a very bad hotel, then I borrowed money to rent a car. I went to the home every single day by 6 o'clock in the morning, when it was the earliest I could get in. I spent every day with my son for 6 weeks. Every day I took Dennis out, and he practiced getting in and out of his wheelchair. He practiced being able to eat with his hand. I asked for him to be able to use a walker. They only did it 4 times. I asked for a bar put over his head so he could pull himself up out of the bed himself to build his muscles. The lady finally told me I needed to mind my own business. Then I was told if I didn't control myself and my mouth, I was no longer going to be allowed to come in there to visit Dennis. I did exactly what was expected of me, but I vowed that I was going to get my son out of there. I talked to Dr. Jung, and I asked him about taking my son out because my mother had the power of attorney. He said no, with Dennis's condition, it would not be a good idea for him to go anyplace else. I disagreed. I saw the potential in my son, and I knew that he could have a better quality of life, especially at 38 years old. He had a lot of things that he could do and learn to do. And June and Shannon Hart encouraged Dennis to don't give up. Don't ever give up. You got to keep working to make your life better. And that's what we tried to do. When I found out that Dennis was in this home, I kept calling. I mean, I called on September 10th. I called on September 11th. I finally flew there in December, but I called on October 16th. My mother was finally allowed to go in and visit Dennis on the 16th, but they followed her around and they listened to her conversation. And then his now ex-wife had told everybody that we were no longer allowed, any family members were allowed to visit him or to see him. My mother got the power of attorney switched over, so we were able to make that connection with Dennis again. And every single day I would get on my laptop and I'd work on my laptop to find different places, different avenues to save my son. The people in the home, to their credit, I'll say, the majority of them were good. The staff members higher up were awful. This was about a control mechanism, and they get paid. They get paid to warehouse veterans. They got paid to warehouse a 38-year-old young man there. They get paid for this. It's all about money. So when I decided I was going to take him out, of course they tried to block me on everything they could do. His ex-wife also authorized to have a living will done, so that if Dennis had trouble swallowing or he got to the point where he was bad because of his MS, to pull the plug and to let him die. And Dennis got scared, and that's when he started calling me. When I heard about this, I immediately went in and demanded that another one be made. I called in a notary that came in, and we did a new one. That would not happen. My son, if something was to happen, he would have quality of life, but that was up to him to make that decision. It's not up to me, it's not up to anybody else, it's his life. I called these people over and over again at this home to get help. They wouldn't return my calls. They told me I needed to mind my own business. They said that his then wife had control. So when she lost it, the control, they still wouldn't release anything. They wouldn't release any information to us. They had treated my son like he was a baby. Instead of encourage him to do more, they just let it go. I called the VA in Hilo and demanded that somebody call me back. I called Tulsi Gabbard, Representative Tulsi Gabbard's office in Honolulu, Washington, D.C. 4 times, and I asked them to please have Tulsi Gabbard, because she's from the islands, she's a Iraqi war vet like Dennis, to come and visit my son, sit down and talk to this wounded warrior, just like you are a warrior. Come talk to him. Wouldn't do it. The guy in Honolulu proceeded to tell me off, in other words. He told me that I needed to stop calling, and I refused to stop calling. I kept doing it over and over and over again. Still, nobody ever contacted me. Nobody ever bothered to follow through. The VA in Hilo, Hawaii, not only attributed to the decline of my son's health, but they tried to block us. And I am a mother for the rest of my life, and I take it very seriously. So if you think that I'm just going to let this go, you're wrong. And I'm not the only one. What has happened to my son is minor compared to others. But the Hilo, Hawaii VA is one of the worst I have ever seen. Everybody is just a number, and there is nobody there that takes special care into what's happening to these soldiers. If you ask our young men and women to go to war, you damn well better prepare to take care of them when they come back. And if you're not, then you're not in the right job. Nobody should be in that job if you can't put a special connection to each one of them. The young man that I said goodbye to at Fort Riley, Kansas, that went to war in Iraq, died. My son died in Iraq. The one that came back is one I had to learn all over again. And it's very, very difficult. It was very difficult dealing with someone with a brain injury and MS. Nobody gave us mothers a book on how to take care or what to do with someone with traumatic brain injury or MS, or both. And did you know there's over 20,000 combat troops that have been diagnosed with TBI that now have MS or ALS? And what is happening to them? If they don't have someone, a mother that has a mouth like me, or someone that cares, they're just dumped in the system. They are warehoused. My son's lucky today because Wounded Warrior Project has taken him to get him on his own. He is doing all the things the VA Hilo, Hawaii said he would never, ever do. They said he would never be on his own. They said he would never be able to feed himself. I was told he was going to die in that home. And I don't have to say who said it, but I've had 3 different people tell me that who worked, not just in the home, but in the VA system, that my son was going to die there. And I wasn't about to give up on him. So if I'm not going to give up on him, who the hell are you to give up on him?